I appreciate being invited to visit even in this way. My position is that I'm a widow. I wasn't a widow until a year ago yesterday. And my story is much the same as those that you have already heard. When I left our home after taking care of my husband for 12 days here at home, trying to get him over whatever it was that he had, and finally realizing we needed help as we rode down over the hill of our pastures, he looked and he said, "I don't think I will ever see this again." And those words haunt me because indeed that is the truth. When we got to the ER, I was told I could not go back with him, even though he was unable to speak for himself. And so my son, whom you'll hear from shortly, was able to help me to actually get back with him into the small room where I spent the last hour I would ever see him. He appeared to rally and was getting better there in the Sterling Hospital. And suddenly I had an emergency phone call 2 days after he had been there telling me he would die unless I agreed to have him intubated immediately. And this was the beginning of the horror and the nightmare, because I was not given the opportunity to interface with medical personnel to make any decisions or to understand. Every conversation that I had with anybody was on the phone. It was always emergent, always negative, and I always felt treated as though I didn't know what I was doing, even though I had been married to him for nearly 49 years. So, of course, he did end up being sent to Greeley, and even his own doctor said, "I believe Richard's heart was broken," when he knew they would have to intubate him. What I would propose, and it is simply an echo of everything that you have already been hearing, and I know these are sad stories and you are faced with stacks of facts, but the fact is that I could have contributed to care, palliative or not. I don't know if the outcome would have been different had I been allowed to be with him. I know that my life here on earth certainly would be different if I had been allowed to be with him. But the day that he died, I called and called repeatedly because somehow his body couldn't be found by the mortician that I had contracted with. In trying to locate that and get some closure for myself, I talked to a young man who was in charge of nursing that night. He told me his sad story for 30 minutes. And I know that the hospital staff people, if we want to talk about the burnout that our staffs are facing, Mrs. Soper has highlighted that. This is something that could be alleviated by simply having a family member there who would know what to do. So I would urge you to vote yes on this bill. There is a need for legal action to make sure that this is not repeated over and over again as we go through life on this earth in these times. And I thank you.
I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Gillum. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives with us. I'd now like to turn to Mr. Daniel Gillum.
You hear me okay?
Yes,
can
we
you
can.
hear me?
Yes, we can. Please
okay.
Proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members, and Senator Sonnenberg. I am Daniel Gillum. I'm the elder son of the late Richard Gillum, testifying on my own behalf in support of Senate Bill 2253. You heard that the fear of separation and isolation kept my father home away from professional care for 2 weeks. And then his worst fears came true once he had to go to the hospital. He was without a familiar advocate for the next 19 days until he died. That was 1 year and 2 days ago. Despite the assurances of daily FaceTime calls, They were few and far between. And when we were finally allowed in to see his dying breaths, he was malnourished and emaciated. I would not have recognized him on the street. He was lying in an excruciating position due to his torn shoulder ligaments, which no one at the hospital knew about. He needed my mom by his side. Some Colorado hospitals seem to be allowing limited visitation for COVID patients, yet many still do not. And yet, as we've heard, the balance of the medical journals and knowledge knows that visitors are good for patients. Medical journals are calling for humane visitation policy, and they're reporting the benefit to patients and hospitals alike. An article titled "To Suffer Alone" was written by a doctor about his father back in August of 2020. The journal of that was in the Journal of Hospital Medicine. Also, the Patient Experience Journal published an article last year entitled, a long title, "The Influence of COVID-19 Visitation Restrictions on Patient Experience and Safety Outcomes, a Critical Role for Subjective Advocates." The study concluded what we've heard from the doctors, what we all as human beings, including the medical community, know, that both care providers and patients stand to benefit from allowing visitors, even on a limited basis, and no one should be without a familiar advocate in their hours of greatest need. I want to say that these articles talked about the thing that we hear from the hospitals, that it's in the best interest and we can't have the spread. But then they balance that out and say, but we don't know if we're doing the patients very much good. I also want to call back to the CDPHA representative that said since early 2020, every patient has had a right to a visitor. I think I heard that correctly. I apologize if not. My father died in January 2021, well after early 2020, well after late 2020. And you can still find on websites, hospital associations or companies in Colorado that flatly state no visitors allowed for COVID patients. We testified at the, I'm sorry, I have more if you want to hear it.
Please proceed, but just be cognizant of the time, and we will have the opportunity for questions as well.
Okay. I was just going to say, I testified last April before the House Health and Insurance Committee in support of a similar bill, which died in that committee. And this atrocity continues in our state. The healthcare system has not improved. I'm not talking about the individual heroes on the floor, but the system has not improved in this area, so we are here again asking for our government to intervene. We don't want to make their jobs harder, but truly no nurse can fill that void and inspire the will to recover that a man's wife of nearly 50 years could. And I do not believe we're going to see significant recovery rates until trusted advocates are allowed to visit. Everything else I have has already been said. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm so sorry for your loss. I want to see if there are any questions, or would you like for us to hear from this whole from the entire family and then open it up for questions? Would that be okay? Okay, in that case, I'm going to continue and we will hear from Mr. Roy Gillum.
Family.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for seeing us today. My name is Roy Gillum. I represent myself and my family. Today I come as a husband, a father of 4 boys, as a grieving son who experienced the loss of my father, as a rancher, as a man who believes that it is a family's right and duty to be together and care for their loved ones. When we took Dad to the hospital, I told him that we wouldn't leave him alone. The first hospital my dad was in threatened to call the police when I went in to check on his well-being, in spite of the fact that their patient Bill of Rights, debated over long and hard, I'm sure, specifically says that all patients may have a support person. While my dad was locked in the hospital with no love or support system, we called and tried to meet with every nurse and hospital administrator we could to plead our case that it would be better for him if he were allowed to have his wife at bedside. The amazing thing was they all agreed with us. They said these no visitation policies go against everything they believe about a patient's physical healing and their emotional and mental well-being. We spoke with nurses who literally said they go home after shift and cry because they're exhausted not only from the workload but from the emotional strain of feeling the pain from these families torn apart. I want to tell you that seeing my dad at time of death was far too little and far too late. It is pitiful. It's criminal and inhumane at best. The end comes to us all. The issue isn't the fact that Dad passed away. The issue is the way he was treated and the separation in his last days. I spent decades working alongside my dad nearly every day. He needed us to be with him during his last days as well. Now, I've got a little experience and perspective regarding the value of a patient having support at bedside. My third son lived through a similar life-threatening respiratory sickness, which required sedation and spending time on a ventilator. The staff did remarkable work, but I also know that it was imperative for my little boy to have his mama and daddy there. When my son had been unable to eat for 13 days and continuity of care was lost, I was there to advocate and demand that the staff actually get some nutrition flowing through that feeding tube that they had placed days before. We prayed, we encouraged him, we dried his tears, and when the fear from choking and the pain from those needles was so intense that he fought through the sedation and opened his eyes, I was there to steady him, to look him in the eye and comfort him, saying, Daddy's here, keep fighting. I know for a fact that helped him. I know for a fact that every patient needs that support. And I know for a fact that every patient deserves that opportunity and respect. Please vote in support of this Senate Bill 53.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gillum. I'm now going to proceed to Matt Gillum.
Good evening. My name is Matt Gillum, and I'm growing up on our family ranch in Peets, Colorado. My great-great-grandpa Roy started this family ranch in 1917 and passed it on to my great-grandpa Dean, who then passed it on to my grandpa Richard. My grandpa wanted to leave a lasting legacy, so he passed it on to my mom and dad of January 1st of 2021. You can see that our family roots run deep. I wish you could have met my grandpa. I have so many wonderful memories of him. Riding horses, doing cattle work, branding, and I even gave my grandpa a ride in my go-kart once. We both survived that adventure. My grandpa was an excellent leather carver, and for the last 3 years, we worked for months on our 4-H projects. Despite having the biggest, strongest hands you've ever seen, he could carve the most intricate and smallest detailed work. He would have made each and every one of you feel welcome if you had come to visit our ranch. Despite spending nearly every day of my life with my grandpa, I could not do that for the last 19 days of his life. I don't understand why the policies even exist to keep family apart. He was my grandpa before he was the hospital's patient. Family deserves the respect that this bill allows. I told my parents one morning that I believe the prisoners in our county jail have more rights than my grandpa did when he was a patient. The day my grandma and dad brought him to town, I was being a normal 11-year-old boy playing basketball in the shop. Had I known this would be the last day I would ever see my grandpa alive, I would have run up to him and given him a hug and told him I loved him. The next time I saw him, he was in his casket. We buried him on our family ranch, and it became my responsibility to use my rope to lower him into the ground instead of roping calves with him in the spring. Please stop this insanity. I believe we have a God-given right to be together as a family. I strongly urge you to pass Senate Bill 22053 so other 12-year-old boys can go rope with their grandpa on the plains where their roots run deep.
Your grandpa raised a good family, and those roots do run deep.
Thank you.
And I'm appreciative of your words. Jake, please proceed.
Solitary confinement has begun to be fully recognized as a severe form of torture. United Nations experts on torture have called for all countries to ban solitary confinement. In a report made by the University of North Carolina School of Law, the severe isolation that solitary confinement entails was found to cause anxiety, depression, mental illness, panic, and constitutes as a form of torture. However, the worst of the torture stems from the lack of human contact. This basic human need to interact with others is incredibly important to the maintenance of a healthy mind and body. Psychologists have seen that extreme isolation, even for a short time, can quickly cause long-lasting psychological harm. My question to you is, are we talking about prisons or how the current healthcare system is handling the COVID-19 pandemic? In our own circle of friends, there's a family that had their dad and adult daughter in different hospitals, both with COVID. The dad was in Colorado and was denied family visitation for 21 days before the family saw him on his deathbed. The adult daughter was in Nebraska and was allowed to have her husband by her side 24/7. He provided the steady care that she needed, and she is alive and well to this day. Clearly, there are emotional and health benefits to having loved ones by our side. We recognize that there are variations within different healthcare systems and how they are handling patient visitation policies, but the beauty of this Senate bill is that it will get rid of this most severe form of torture, also known as isolation. I watched my parents fight for the right to see my grandpa. I saw them cry and grieve over time lost. I never got the chance to say goodbye. On January 30th, 2021, I walked upstairs and found my mom crying on the couch. She told me that Grandpa had died. This finality is incomprehensible. Everything about my life is my family living out life together. We do it all together. We have breakfast together. My mom home educates us together. My brothers and I go outside and play together. We do chicken chores and gather eggs together. We work cows and ride horses together. We go to church together. Simply, we do all of life together. Please stop the torture of solitary confinement and allow us to do life together. You have a remarkable opportunity with this Senate bill. You have the opportunity to let families be together again. Please pass this bill so that no matter the future pandemic, we would never have to face sickness or old age apart. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for those powerful words. I'm going to now proceed to Mrs. Brandy Gillam.
My name is Brandy Gillam, and I represent myself. We the people, not we the lobbyists, not we the huge Colorado Hospital Association, but we the people who elected you to serve us, are asking you to uphold the Colorado State Constitution, where it states that you will promote the general welfare and secure the blessing of liberty to others. This bill is an amazing opportunity to allow families to be family again. We talk about an overwhelmed healthcare system, and we can clearly tell that keeping families away from one another is not actually helping the system, but further wearing out the staff and medical teams and causing such stress and anxiety to the patient's family. We have heard story after story about people that they would rather die of COVID than to be forced to live or die alone. I completely agree that dying alone is a tragedy, but I actually believe the even greater tragedy is living alone. When my family went to the hospital to fight for the right to see Richard, not once did a single medical professional say it was in his best interest to separate him from us, and yet not one person within that medical system could actually move the stone wall in front of us that allowed us to be family. But here's when the logic loses all semblance of reason. The fact medical professionals can go home to their families every night is the same reason we should be allowed to go in to see ours. We aren't asking to interrupt patient care, but simply the opportunity to take care of our family. We hired the hospital to do a job. We so often presume that simply because they have a degree level higher in education that they know best. They may know lungs or hearts or pharmaceuticals better, but they don't know our loved one. We didn't expect them to be family, but we did expect to be allowed to do our job. I know there are plenty of true, well-meaning individuals that work in the healthcare field, but I've also seen through my own experience of cancer and 6 months of chemotherapy, my third son being on a ventilator for 3 days and hospitalized for 13, and most recently, my fourth son, my 2-year-old, dying in my arms, that the left hand does not always talk to the right hand. The continuity of care only exists when a family member is present to gain the whole picture and be an advocate for the patient. I want you to think long and hard right now. If it was your parent or your spouse or your child that was being kept away from you for 19 days, how would you respond? If you weren't allowed to be there to encourage them, love them, pray over them, what would you do? It is shameful and neglectful for us to not advocate for our family members. The point of this bill is to protect the future, to protect the family unit, to preserve the right to be loved by those that love us. Help us secure the blessing of liberty. I urge you, I beg you, I am pleading for you to pass this Senate Bill 53.
Thank you, Mrs. Gillum, for your testimony. I'm very sorry for your loss.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez.
Colleagues, do you have any questions for this family? Seeing no questions, I want to thank you so much for your powerful words and for sharing with our committee your experiences as you've navigated these strange and really devastating times. That concludes the list of individuals who had signed up to testify in regards to this policy. And Senator Sonnenberg, I don't believe there's anyone else in the audience who wishes to testify on the bill, and so I'm going to go ahead and close the amendment portion. The witness portion of this hearing. Senator Sonnenberg, I wanted to see if you have any amendments that you wish to offer at this time.
Madam Chair, not right now. If I could give some closing thoughts. First, let me start by saying thank you. You were very lenient. You were very lenient with the time. There's a lot that needed to be said. And I know this is just as hard for you as it is for these families. I know you have lost loved ones because of this. I don't know how your scenario worked out. And were you able to have those conversations with family members? But I can tell you what you heard today was a whole bunch of different stories that explain broken hearts, not able to make decisions, people that may have been able to be saved if they'd had that physical contact. You know, I missed yesterday up here because I was taking my elderly parents to doctors in Greeley. And I do that more regularly now than before. And I can tell you I was in that scenario, I can go back in the room with them. And 2 times yesterday, I had to explain to my parents what the doctor was saying. How do families navigate that? How do families work through trying to be able to advocate for their loved one if they're not there? My father spent over 3 weeks in the hospital with COVID. No contact. The nurse, bless her heart, tried to help my father with FaceTime so we could have a conversation. Never worked. Couldn't work for him. Something about an 85-year-old man and a cell phone and FaceTime just didn't work out well. I know this was sent, this committee, for a specific purpose. I understand that. But if any of this moved you at all today, to know, to understand that there's a problem, that there's something that needs to be done, and maybe this isn't it. Maybe there's something else we can do. If there is, and you're moved by what you heard today, that families can't be torn apart, lay it over. I'll work with you. Don't make it go away. We know we have a problem that needs fixed. Madam Chair, I don't have an amendment today. I don't know what the right amendment is. December was a challenge. January was a challenge. And I wasn't able to do as much work on this as I'd like to, especially with... I'll leave it there and just tell you that we have a problem that needs fixed. This bill took in the proposed amendments that were brought forward last year by the groups that opposed the bill and wanted it amended. That had to do with the Medicare and Medicaid stuff. If you're willing to work on it, I'm your guy. I'll leave it there, Madam Chair. Handle it however you see fit.